Hey there, Banditos. Welcome to the Wednesday episode of the Dollar Bin Bandits. I'm Mike Farah. I am thrilled to bring this new interview to you. It is with Christopher Priest, a extraordinarily prolific and excellent writer of comics and other things. He's done novels and many others. He's even written music and performed music. But we know him from so many different books and projects, things he started at Marvel, things like Conan, the Falcon miniseries, Power Man and Iron Fist, moved on to DC and other publishers, including doing such projects as Green Lantern, Quantum and Woody at Valiant, a number of projects with MD Bright, and was a founding member of Milestone. Did the Ray, his own creator-owned comic at DC called Zero, Xero, which you should look up. Criminally underrated. Didn't get really a chance to do, I think, what they wanted to do on that, but still great series. Black Panther, which many of you know him from. That's where I was, I think, introduced to Christopher Priest, and then on and on. Deathstroke, he did a big run for DC, and now is working on Vampirella. And he has a new start to the Vampirella series, Vampirella #1, coming out on March 26th, and then just announced with Joe Quesada, Marvel Knights, The World to Come, this big sort of future of the Marvel and maybe just the Marvel Knights universe. So a lot to look forward to there. So enough with the blathering about his bona fides. Let's hear from the man himself. This is Christopher Priest. We are positively thrilled to have writer Christopher Priest on the program. Christopher, how are you?
Hey, I'm great, Michael. How are you today?
I'm doing well. We are going to kick this thing off with our patented, typical, generic first question, which is, how did you first discover comic books?
I got sick when I was 8 years old. I had, I don't know, one of those diseases like measles or mumps or something. And my mother went to the drugstore to pick up my prescription. And in those days, we had these spinner racks. You know what a spinner rack is, don't you?
Absolutely.
Okay, in the drugstore. And she foolishly bought me a comic book. And the first comic book was an issue of Superman's pal, Jimmy Olsen. And in that issue, for some reason, Jimmy was dressed like a pirate. That's all I remember about that particular thing was that Jimmy was a pirate. And that was my first comic book. And she lived to regret that decision.
When was the next comic book? Did you immediately were like, this is amazing. Get me as many of these things as possible?
Oh yeah, but kids don't really have money, so you have to get mom to buy it, and and
Right.
and mom just thought, well, comic books are just going to rot your brain. That was kind of the party line in those days. That comic books had no real literary value. So I think I would just kind of like save up my allowance. I didn't get much allowance, but whatever I got, I would save it up for comic books, and scrape things together or trade with other kids for comic books. And when I got a little older, I got little side jobs where I could make my own money and buy my own comics.
Nice.
Hmm.
And what was your realization? Because it comes for people when they start collecting or when they start reading at different times, that there are actually people that are making these comics and that you can possibly be one of them. Was that immediate that you started looking and you were like, oh, there are names here that are making these things?
Yeah, I think that happened a bit later. I think I was probably 13 or 14 before I started to get the sense that of the personalities. By that time, I was reading Marvel. DC did not do a lot of personality based editorial, while Marvel centered around Stan Lee as a personality. And Stan Lee, and then of course Roy Thomas and Jerry Conway and those people. So I started to learn who these people were that were actually working on the comic books. Um, and at some point, I figured that uh, I wanted to be. I don't know that I necessarily wanted to be a person who drew the comics or wrote the comics. I wanted to be the person who coordinate all that, the person who was directing all that, who would put these teams together. I wanted to be the person that produced this object. And at some point, I learned that the proper title for that person was editor. So I actually wanted to be a comic book editor more than I wanted to be a comic book writer or artist.
Wow, that's very prescient, I guess, in terms of having that editorial instinct early on, and I feel like not many do. But you were able to take that, and then I suppose that urge to coordinate and project manage, and obviously edit, and got an internship at Marvel. Was that right out of high school, or was that after? When
Yeah,
when when did that happen?
that was senior year in high school. New York City had a high school internship program, and I signed up for I think four law firms. My mother wanted me to be a lawyer, so I was on track to go to law school. So I signed up for four law schools. I mean, sorry, four law firms, and Marvel Comics. I saw Marvel Comics on the list, and I was like, this can't be. No, this can't be. So I signed up for Marvel Comics. Then I blew off all of the interviews for the law firms because I had this girlfriend. I'm trying to remember who that was. I'm pretty sure that was Valerie. Hello, Valerie. I had this girlfriend that I was seeing, and I was running back and forth chasing after her. And I was really, really super irresponsible when I was 17. But the Marvel Comics appointment, I kept that one. And I showed up to that one, and it was myself. I came in with a comic book that I had written and drawn. I was enrolled at a trade school. It was a high school that taught media arts. It taught printing, and it taught journalism, and it taught you how to be in I guess the journalism business. So we learned how to write articles, and we learned how to write short stories and so forth. And then we learned how to run the printing press. We learned how to create blue lines and cut film. And so I knew how to do everything from soup to nuts. So I walked in with the blue lines, which is like a pre-press proof of whatever it is you're getting ready to publish. And I walked in with this thing, the blue lines for this, I guess it was a 32-page comic book of this character I created. I think his name was Stingray, and he was fighting Spider-Man or something. And I had drawn it, written it, lettered it, and so forth. And I walked into Marvel Comics, and there were like five other kids there, and they were all artists. They were all from like the School of Art and Design. So they all had like their art portfolios. And I thought, well, this is never going to happen. And then the tallest man I'd ever seen in my life, at least the tallest white man that I'd ever seen in my life, came wandering out of the office, and that was Jim Shooter. And Jim Shooter interviewed me, and he flipped through the comic book, and on a couple of pages, I heard him chuckle. So I said, "Hey, I made the guy laugh. That's got to be a good sign." Um, and against all odds, Jim selected me over the art kids, and that's pretty much how it all began. That was June. That was, I believe, June 6th, 1978.
Wow, amazing.
Mhm.
And obviously he made the right choice because you parlayed that internship into a job soon after at Marvel, right?
Yeah, I don't know that he made the right choice. History will have to be the judge of that, But as everyone I think who's ever had an internship will tell you, it's really about what you make of the internship. So
Mhm.
I was blessed to be working. I was doing grunt work, just fetching coffee and running errands and delivering email and making tons and tons of Xerox copies. But I was working with, at the time, the top talent at Marvel. I mean, Len Wein and Dave Cockrum. No, Len Wein and Marv Wolfman shared an office in the back. Dave Cockrum was next door to them. Maurice Severin was the art director in those days. And then you had Al Milgrom sharing an office with Joe Duffy, who was the writer of Power Man and Iron Fist in those days. Um, and every room that you went to up and down the hallway, behind every door at Marvel, was, somebody that was an artisan, somebody was a writer or an artist or a letterer or a colorist, or and you got to learn from these people. And then, of course, in those days, Stan Lee was actually still working there. So at some point, Jim Shooter takes me into Stan's office and plops me down in, the big comfy chair. And Stan comes in, "Hiya, Jim, how's it going?" And he sits down with, a stack of original Jack Kirby art. I mean, just the actual pages. And Stan Lee sits down next to me on this couch here with his Jack Kirby art, and he starts explaining to me the principle behind sequential storytelling. And that's how I met Stan Lee, and Stan and I knew each other, for the rest of his life. He was a wonderful, terrific man.
And you come into this position, or the position after the internship. You're in editorial. You're where you wanted to ultimately get to.
Yeah, I was hanging on to the side of the ship as it was floating away. So I would take any sort of little freelance gig. So Nelson Yomtov, who was an editor there at the time, he gave me some proofreading, little proofreading gigs, for some prose books. They weren't comics. They were
Right.
textbooks that were allegedly written by Stan, but they were probably ghost written by somebody. And then an editor named Paul Lakin, uh, he actually had an office there, but he didn't like to come in. He liked to work out of his house on Long Island. So he really needed a body at the office who could move the paper, when
Yeah.
the artwork came in and process the vouchers and run stuff over the printer and yada 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 yada. So he was looking for a little scut boy to do that, and I got hired by Paul Lakin, and I believe he was paying me $50 a month, and that was my first official like ongoing job. And yeah, it was, you can't live off of that, but I was just happy to be in the building, Mike.
You were a tenacious barnacle on the ship that was Marvel.
Yeah, I was 17 years old, and I was skinny then. I was handsome then. I'm none of those things now. And I just wanted to be there. And so, like, the joke was on Paul. I mean, yeah, he was paying me $50 a month. I would have done it for nothing.
Yeah.
So
Um,
eventually, Paul moved on, and Larry Hama was hired to replace him as Crazy Magazine's editor. So Larry comes in. Now I don't know Larry at all, so now I'm a little frightened because everyone's like, "Oh, it's Two Gun Hama." They started calling him Two Gun Hama, and I've never seen him with two guns.
that's
Take
good to
that for what,
know.
yeah, take that for whatever you want. I've never seen him with two, but
Only an odd number of guns. One, three, five.
so 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 Hama comes in and he has like like waist length hair. He had really long hair in those days. So and he's like a rock and roll guy. So he's got guitars and stuff like that. I've seen him with two guitars. Okay, so I don't know what this means for me. So at some point, I'm just like walking on eggshells around Larry because I don't know how to be, And at some point, Larry asked me, "Well, what was Paul paying you?" And I said, "Well, he was paying me $50 a month." And Larry just explodes with laughter, So Larry goes into Shooter and says, you know, this kid is a walking lawsuit. It's like, he's like the only black face in here, and you're paying him $50 a month. You can't do that, I mean, So I'm pretty sure he went into Shooter, and Shooter in those days, hindsight is just so great, Mike, because you look back and you start to realize you know, uh, people were kind of resentful of the change that Jim Shooter represented to the company because he came in and he was a guy who wanted to make comics better and make them come out on time. And those are two opposing goals. He was a crazy man. That's
Right.
an unrealistic expectation. They can be good or they can come out on time. You have to, yeah, Jim, yeah, you have to pick,
Choose one.
but no, he didn't, accept that sort of thing. So Jim was always innovating. He was always trying to wrangle more out of the cheapo company that owned us at the time. That was Cadence Industries. They made pencils or something like that. and they didn't understand what we did, and we really had no idea what they did, So, Jim having to go upstairs to the ninth floor and rattle his cup, for a bigger budget or something like that. And a lot of people really don't know or don't fully appreciate it, the changes that Jim went through, but we're all, every one of us, making more money, and the industry is so much better because of men like Shooter, like Paul Levitz, who learned to outsmart the corporate, neckties uh, that were over us. So Jim Shooter had to go and find, some minimum wage slot, where he could get money to actually pay me, at least minimum wage to be there. So that's between Larry and Jim.
We had, or rather, my co-host had the opportunity to talk to Jim actually, and they get into a lot of that, and it's very interesting, sort of the perception of Jim and that time period versus, his kind of how he talks about his approach and how others, like you, talk about what the intent was
Yeah.
and trying to, make the comics world a more professional place,
Happier place, a
happier
kinder,
place.
gentler place.
Yes.
I will tell you that the other thing that hindsight taught me was that the people who bristled at Jim's approach, um, who had been there before him or had been his peers, because he was an assistant editor. He went from assistant editor to the boss. So right away,
Yeah.
that's going to rankle a bunch of
Yeah.
people. But more to the point, these folks that worked there, the staffers that were there, they all had a point of reference, whether that reference was Archie Goodwin or whether it was Marv Wolfman or Len Wein. There were a bunch of editor-in-chiefs who had sort of come and gone. Um, I personally had no other point of reference than Jim. So to me, Jim was, I don't know what they were talking about. He seemed perfectly reasonable to me, because I had no prior point of
Right.
reference. I didn't, to them, I guess they thought that Jim was kind of an aberration, or that his behavior was somehow different. I would have no way of knowing that.
Got it. So you talked about coming into this entire experience and coming into the industry as wanting to be an editor and wanting to be an editorial and sort of be the ringleader or a ringleader of the circus. And you certainly, got to do that as assistant editor with Larry and other jobs. But eventually, you do get into writing, and I'd love to know. And I think the first credit you have is the Falcon miniseries, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
Um, how did that come about? You weren't looking for it, but you did start writing. How did that project come about, and why was that the first project? Writing.
Okay, so in those days, Jim was training a bunch of writers. Myself, Len Kaminsky, I believe Kurt Busiek. There was a number of us who were kind of getting our feet wet in the business. And in those days, Jim had a discretionary, or I don't know if he had a discretionary fund or if he just invented a discretionary fund, where he'd buy a bunch of stories, knowing that their stories may never see print, that he may end up burning them, or at some point he'll give our stories to artists who are trying to break in, and it's their first job, like Greg LaRocque or Mark Bright or somebody that was coming through the door. Um, so he was using R&D money basically to train new people and bring new people into the business. And at some point, he would end up with these what we called inventory stories. He'd have a stack of these inventory stories, and then they'd create like the Marvel Winter Special or something, and bag it and release it through Walmart or something, and there you go.
Right.
So I did a bunch of these. I did a couple Iron Man stories. I wrote 15 drafts of the Captain America graphic novel that never got printed. Hulk, Thor. I did all kinds of stuff. And one of the stories that I did, and this is just Jim just assigning things at random. And one of the things he said was like, go write a Falcon story. And I said, okay. So I wrote this Falcon story, and he gave it to this kid who was trying to break in, named Paul Smith.
Mm.
Uh, and So Paul comes back with this thing, and the art is just phenomenal. It's just absolutely phenomenal. And they made a bunch of copies of Paul's art and circulated around the office, and people were flipping out over Paul's art. Unfortunately, the book was not lettered, so they're the editors are very excited about Paul's art, but they're not reading my writing, you know. So Paul sort of got picked up. He became the new draft pick, and I didn't. And he kind of moved on, and they immediately snapped him up. And next thing you know, he's drawing the X-Men, and next thing you know, he's like this huge. He's Paul Smith,
Yeah.
okay. And I'm like, well, what about me? I got left at the bus stop. Well, once again, clinging to the ship as it sails off. Um, so Jim wanted to actually print this Falcon story, but he thought that it would make more sense if we finished it off, if we made it like into a miniseries. So there was another young man trying to break in. His name was Mark Bright, and so he gave this. He had me finish. He had me write three more installments because that was just a done in one story. So he had me invent some other reason for this story to continue. Brought in Mark Bright. Mark Bright finished the thing. We did, three issues altogether, and Shazam, we have my first published comic book work.
Wow. And was that your sort of proving ground that you got future assignments off of, particularly Power Man and Iron Fist, or was there a time period where that just sort of okay, that was great. We got we got some great artists out of it. Christopher wrote a great story, but we don't have anything else. What was the next step?
Yeah, the next step was I was not well liked. Some of that was me because I think I can be a little obnoxious. I'm sure I can be a little obnoxious. I don't think I intended to be obnoxious, but I probably was. I was 17. Come on. You know, uh,
We're all obnoxious at 17.
yeah. But the bigger problem was that I was Jim's protege. They saw me just budding up to Jim because I liked Jim and Jim liked me and Jim was exceptionally kind to me. Um, and so I was not really well liked. So um, uh, unfortunately, in this business, it's a very small business, and it can become very personality based. So if you piss off a handful of people, you're not working anymore. You piss off the wrong person, which I have done on many occasions, including certain publishers who tried to run me out of the business. And I think if you talk to just about anybody who's been around for any length of time, they'll have similar stories. I mean, for God knows how long, Mark Waid couldn't get hired at DC Comics, which made absolutely no sense at all. But that was a personality clash with the guy who was running the place at the time.
Mhm.
So it's one of those kind of things. So I really, I got like little scraps from the table every now and then. And usually I got the scraps because Jim would either assign me a inventory story or he would, lean on somebody to do it. But as far as Power Man and Iron Fist, Denny O'Neil, uh, of whom I was a huge fan. I mean, I can't tell you how much I respected and admired him, and I had followed his work for a long time, and I would read anything with Denny's name on it. So at some point, Denny O'Neil started working at Marvel, and he was the editor of Power Man and Iron Fist. I don't remember why there was a change in the guard because Joe Duffy had left, and I think Kurt was writing it, and I don't know why Kurt wasn't writing it anymore. I really don't know what happened. All I know is that after the Falcon series came back, and after Mark and I got done with that, uh, Jim Shooter at some point, I don't know what the impetus was, but he comes and finds me in the office. He literally takes me by the arm and walks me into Denny's office. And we're standing in Denny's office, and he talks to Denny, and he points to me, and he goes, "This is your new Power Man and Iron Fist writer," which Denny was really unhappy about because no editor wants the boss coming in and telling him who he's going to put on the book. So Denny and my relationship started out really bad because he didn't want me there. I
Mhm.
felt really awkward. I'm being put in a situation. And I started writing Power Man Iron Fist, and they were perfectly awful. issues, the first couple of issues, because it took me a while to kind of get it. I really admired Joe Duffy's and Kerry Gammel's work. So I was trying to sort of you refer back to them and kind of do them. Um, but yeah, it started out kind of really badly, and I think it was only it took 2 or 3 issues before I think Denny started to warm up to me or whatever the story was, and uh, uh, and eventually I think by 4 or 5 issues in we were like in a very good place, and ultimately we became very close friends, and Denny was if Larry Hama was like a dad to me, Denny was like an uncle, and I'm not ashamed to say I loved him a lot.
Were you after the Falcon and maybe even after this, at that point had the writing bug, if you will, caught you? I mean, were you actively now looking to continue to write rather than or in addition to your editorial duties?
Well, I'd always been writing. I've been writing since I was 10 years old. So that was nothing new. And even though I wanted to be the editor, the guy in charge, um, you know, I certainly intended to write and always wanted to continue writing. Now, back in those days, um, uh, most people who were on staff at Marvel uh, also had side hustles because they were all artisans. They were all either writers or artists or letterers or colorists or whatever. So everybody there did something. And not only did they do something, but Jim encouraged them to do something on the grounds that it was important that we understand what the freelance talent the challenges that the freelance talent has, that we make deadlines the way they make deadlines, that we have to perform the way they have to perform. It's like having the drill sergeant do the PE with you. Um, uh, so it was kind of it was kind of routine that most everybody who worked there, because we frankly the staff jobs didn't pay that much, didn't pay that well. So having a little side gig was very helpful. So yeah, I was going to be writing all along.
Right. You mentioned Mark Bright already, who you worked with on the Falcon, and then I think eventually a number of other times, including maybe Green Lantern, I think at DC,
Yep.
and Quantum and Woody. I wanted to ask you about him particularly, but also about sort of the collaborative, I don't know, synergy. I hate that word, but that you would have with artists. Like what made a creative collaboration really work, particularly with Mark Bright.
I don't think Mark Bright and I had much synergy. I don't think it worked at all. I think I would write the story and then he'd complain about it. And that's pretty much how we did things. And I think I spent a lot of time trying to make Mark happy. So when I sat down to write for Mark, I really wasn't, you're trained as a writer you want to amuse yourself first and foremost, because
Right.
if you're not entertained, they're not going to be entertained, you know. But when I was writing for Shooter, I was seriously nervous about the shooter rules. Jim had a very sort of strict set of guidelines and iron sights that these posts, these goal posts you had to run through. So make sure you hit this and make sure you hit that and make sure you hit the other thing and make sure you follow the Jim Shooter sort of structure. With Mark Bright, I was always just trying to do something that he would like. And I'll give you an example. We did one issue of Quantum and Woody where, I mean, he complained about everything, all the best bits in Quantum and Woody, the things that fans remember the most, the things that made fans laugh the most. Mark hated every one of them. I think the most iconic one was one where they're interrogating some guy on the 21st floor of an office building. They get done, interrogating the guy. Quantum says, "Watch your step, mister," or whatever. And he goes, "Let's move, Woody." And Quantum heads out the window and he does the whole Batman thing and he flips and he flips and he swings and he does all the stuff and he gets down to the street and he runs over to the Woody Mobile, which is like
Right.
a Mustang ragtop, and Quantum hops into the car and he's sitting there and he's waiting for Woody, and then we spend like an entire page of just stat and repeat panels of just Quantum sitting there waiting for Woody and waiting for Woody and waiting for Woody and waiting for Woody. And then you turn the page and finally Woody shows up and Quantum is like, well, what took you so long? Well, Woody took the elevator. Who jumps out the window? And it was a really funny bit that Mark thought, oh, Jim, that's stupid. And that was his refrain to most of everything. So at some point, the ultimate was, I said, look, I got to write something that Mark is actually going to like. And I wrote this issue of Quantum Woody where they're on the top of this snowy mountain, and it was this scene that was stolen. I mean, frame for frame, for the film Batman Beyond. There's the scene where Ducat and Wayne are at the top of this mountain and they're fighting or whatever the story is, and they end up sliding down the mountain, and Ducat goes over
Right.
the edge of the cliff there, and Wayne reaches out and grabs him at the last minute. Okay, if you remember that bit,
Yep.
we did that. We did that. I mean, it's shot for shot. We did that in Quantum and Woody, where there's an explosion and the boys go tumbling down the mountain. Um, and I believe it was Quantum who goes over the edge, and Woody reaches out and grabs him at the last minute, and it's this big heroic moment. I said, like, Mark has got to like this. It's got the action, it's got the pathos, it's got all everything that he likes. So I sent it over to him, you know, and then we have our routine like phone call after he's read the script, and I got so what do you think? And he goes, eh, yeah, it's all right. Well, what's the problem? And he goes, I hate drawing trees. This is Mark Bright, or this was Mark Bright, my
Yeah.
beloved brother. So the bickering back and forth between Quantum and Woody, that was me and Mark. That was completely, I was making very little up in terms of the dynamics of the relationship. It's two guys who love each other and yet get on each other's last nerves, and that was the dynamic between Mark and I.
Yeah. You use the word brother, and it does feel like sort of a sibling kind of relationship in the back and forth that you're
Yeah,
describing. So,
yeah.
um, let's switch over to some of the work you did at DC. I mentioned Green Lantern already. Was that something that was an assignment right off the bat, or did you pursue that character in that world because it was something that you enjoyed and wanted to do, or had a story for, even?
Well, Denny migrated from Marvel to DC. Um, I got catapulted out of Marvel because there was a brouhaha, an editorial brouhaha
Hmm.
at Marvel, mainly between myself and the executive editor Tom DeFalco. Um, so Jim solved the problem by paying me more money to stay home than I was making coming into the office. So it's like he's making an offer that you're not going to refuse. So I got an
Hmm.
exclusive contract to write Spider-Man and Conan and whatever else, Potato Man, whatever it was, and I went home. And when the contract expired, by that time, Denny was over at DC, and Denny said, "Hey, we want to do this unknown soldier thing. How about it?" So I went over to DC to do the Unknown Soldier, and then at some point they launched this thing called Action Comics Weekly, and Denny was shopping for a Green Lantern writer. So I started writing Green Lantern for Action Comics Weekly, and which was a real chore. That's Mark and I again doing that weekly strip for that comic book. Um, and well, once DC came to their senses and said, you know what, a weekly comic, no, no. Once they once they figured out that ain't gonna work. Um, at some point, they wanted to do a soft reboot on Green Lantern. So
Right.
Danny and I started working on a book that we called Emerald Dawn, And what I like to do is the same thing that Denny likes to do. This is why I like Denny's work so much, and I think that's probably what gravitated Denny to me. Is number one, I was a young kid and he could bend me to his will. So like Marv or somebody more established was going to fight with him, but he knew I wasn't going to fight with him. But also because I like to write grounded superheroes. Like you have Joel Schumacher Batman movies, right? And then you have Matt Reeves, the Batman. Okay,
Mhm.
I'm more the Batman guy. If DC ever got dumb enough to let me write Batman, it would feel a lot more like Frank Miller's Batman, or at least Frank Miller's, Batman Year One or something, and not necessarily the Dark Knight, which is kind of an exploded, larger than life, Cape Crusader. But I think that superheroes work best the more dignity and the more reality you inject into it, and then all of the fantastical stuff will now pop.
Mhm.
What made Spider-Man work for me was just how grounded that book was. That he had to struggle to pay. He had to hustle to pay his rent, and he had to keep up with his aunt who was sick all the time, and he had girl problems, and all these real life concerns. And the Fantastic Four felt very real to me. So when they got in their flying car, I went, now that pops. Now that just leaps off the page. Okay, so that's the approach that we took with Green Lantern, and we started working on Emerald Dawn, and we put a lot of work in Emerald Dawn, and then brouhaha. Uh, there was
More
a
brouhaha.
there was a brouhaha at now we're at DC. This is a
Yeah.
DC brouhaha because once the Action Comics weekly bit folded up, um, the original Green Lantern editor was a guy named Andy Helfer. I knew Andy. I loved Andy. Andy and I got along great. He was a very smart guy. He did all this great work with Keith Giffen, of the Justice League International. That's Andy Helfer. A lot of stuff like that. So Andy goes into Dick Giordano and says, "Hey, hey, hey, Action Comics Weekly is dead. I'm the Green Lantern editor. I should have the Green Lantern book. Emerald Dawn should be in my shop." So, Denny goes in and makes his case, and Andy makes his case. And then, Denny loses, and Andy takes over the project. So now I'm in Andy's shop. I've already got this thing up on its feet, but it's like Christopher Nolan Green Lantern, if you can imagine that, if not Zack Snyder. It's probably closer to Christopher Nolan because Christopher Nolan's more of a science guy.
Yeah.
So it's really grounded, very in real science, really thought through Green Lantern, very grounded. We talk about his dad and his dad, dying in a car, in a plane crash in front of his eyes and yada, 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 and the whole deal. And we retell that, Abe and Sir, yada, yada, yada. Here's the ring, blah, blah, blah. Little green men. Okay. And Denny is like, he's like a Carl Sagan guy. He's like the ring it's a metaphor for, the force or whatever, for faith or whatever, you know. So Denny had that perspective, and I agreed with that perspective. Andy, it's magic. Make a giant boxing glove, which I was never going to do, and Mark was never going to do. Okay, but Andy, bless him, his perspective on it, and and this is the dichotomy. I think across all publishers and editors and so forth, where some people prefer. I think DC really trends toward an enhanced or elevated sense of reality, where like, Bruce Wayne takes all four of the Robins, in their secret identities to a fast food chain called Bat Burgers, and it's a Batman themed fast food chain. And he actually goes there, and Bruce Wayne is sitting in his fast food restaurant, in a suit and tie, and he's eating his Bat Burger with a knife and fork. And it's the most ridiculous, stupid thing. With all due respect to writers who make way more money than I do, and I believe that was Tom King. Sorry, Tom. I love Tom. Tom is a wonderful writer. or whoever wrote that. I think it was Tom. But I saw this and I just wanted to firebomb the place. I was like, I think our readers, I think comic book fans, and I could be wrong, and feel free to firebomb me. I think comic book fans are at Avengers Endgame. I think Avengers Endgame, so brilliantly written, acted, directed, art directed. It was just a home run. And I thought it treated our business with such dignity and respect. And I think I mentioned that to Kevin Feige when I was on the set for Infinity War. And I met Joe Russo and Kevin Feige, and I was telling them that I really appreciate the dignity and respect that you treat our business, because a lot of Hollywood people, don't do that. But I think that the comic book fan of today, uh, they're ready for more. They're ready to deal on a different level. They're ready, for more sophisticated, more grown up,
Yeah.
I guess, approaches to things. So with the Green Lantern Emerald Dawn thing, I went from a guy who was kind of a Kevin Nolan guy to a guy who was more like the Shazam movie, which was fun, and I loved the first one anyway, and I loved it. It was a great thing, but it was a really difference of opinion. So I spent 18 months rewriting issue number one of Emerald Dawn, and then finally it occurred to me, they're turning off my electricity. I'm about to get thrown out of my apartment because there's no money coming. You can't sustain that because DC is not paying me 18 times. They're not paying me at all. Excuse me, until Andy accepts one of these drafts. So I went to Andy and said, you know what? It occurred to me that for the last year and a half, I've been telling myself that I have a job, but I actually don't have a job because I've been basically working for free, and nothing I do is satisfying you. And he was very apologetic, very sweet guy. And I said, no, you don't have to apologize. You're the editor. You're in the driver's seat. You should do what you want. And I think what you want is Keith Giffen, and you need to call Keith, And he said, no, 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 we'll work it out, work it out. Call Keith. So I had to kind of talk him into firing me, and he called Keith Giffen, and Keith Giffen scripted over my plot for issue two, and then he wrote the remaining four issues with Mark. And
Right.
that's pretty much the Green Lantern story.
Mm. Um, you also did some editorial work at DC as well. I read that this is kind of this obscure, maybe obscure, it has been obscured, little piece of, I think it was 90s because I remember it growing up, the Impact line.
Yes.
Uh, you were the editor. I don't know if it is sole editor on all of those titles, but I'd love to know because it kind of holds a special place in my me and my co-host's heart. What the I don't know what was what was the intent behind that line? And do you think that it didn't get enough support? Like, would it have worked further if it got more support internally, or what was the cause of it having been short-lived?
Okay. Just briefly, when I was working on a graphic novel at the time, and I was driving a bus. I was a bus driver for a while. I had pretty much left the whole comics thing behind me for quite a while. Um, and then an executive at DC, Mike Gold, he was the director of development there. He pursued me to come on staff, and I wasn't that thrilled about doing it. But so we had a bunch of conversation. I said, "Look, Mike, I'll take the job if it pays more than driving a bus." And he says, "I guarantee you it pays more than driving a bus." And I said, "Okay." So I come on staff at DC, and guess what? It doesn't pay as much as driving a bus. Okay, they really didn't pay very well in those days. So actually, I kept my full-time bus job. So I would routinely come to DC in my bus driver uniform. So I would get up at the crack of dawn and I would go crank up this 40-foot, Greyhound bus. And I would start picking up people down in Princeton, New Jersey, and I would drive them up to Port Authority, and I'd park the bus at Port Authority, and I'd go up to DC Comics, and I'd sit behind a desk, and I'm an editor all day. But, people would come into my office, and they'd see me wearing this bus driver uniform. you know, and then after we knock off for the day, I go back to Port Authority. I pick up the bus. I drive people down to Princeton, and that was my day. And then at night I was producing my wife's record, which is a whole nother story. So we had a studio in the music, a little music studio in the house. So you go home, you sit with the wife, you have dinner, blah blah blah. Then you go into the studio. Now you're doing that gig for 5 or 6 hours. So they were very long days in those days. Uh, so we were doing this research and development stuff. So we were developing a lot of special projects and in different formats. We were experimenting with different paper stocks, all kind of stuff. Impact became a part of that. I was not initially the editor of Impact. I was developing a bunch of other stuff. I was editing the TSR books, Dragonlance, Spelljammer, which is where Joe Quesada came from. Spelljammer was the first book that he did for DC Comics, and then I developed a character called the Ray at DC Comics. I was doing those types of tasks. When Mike Gold left, they reassigned. Oh, Paul Levitt said, we want to relaunch the Impact line, and we want, to kind of reconceive it. So Paul Kupperberg and I sat down, and we came up with a game plan to redesign this thing. And I dragged in Mark Waid and Brian Augustyn to develop a book called The Crucible, uh, which was laid out by Quesada. He didn't have time to do the finished art, but the finished art was going to be done by Dave Cockrum. So this book was gorgeous. It was absolutely gorgeous. And we spent a lot of time retooling the Impact line after Mike left. And then the contract with, because the Impact line, those characters came out of Archie, I believe, or Red Circle was their sub imprint or something. So DC, DC owned the license to those characters, but DC didn't own the characters. So the license came up for renewal.
Mm.
I guess Paul sent our material over to whoever they were, and they signed off on renewing the license with DC and blah blah blah, and then DC canceled it. So I don't know that they ever wanted to go forward with the Impact line after a certain point. I think they wanted that license though. I don't know why. Maybe to reduce competition, or maybe it was for uh, uh, I really don't know. It's kind of a mystery to me, but um, it was a big disappointment to me. And actually, I kind of shut down, and I don't think I ever uh, called my freelancers, especially Dave, who I loved a lot. And I think I just kept them hanging for quite a while before he figured out that this thing had exploded. So I'm really not proud of that, of how I treated the talent on that thing. Because we all really really leaned in, and nobody's ever going to see those pages, and they were absolutely gorgeous. And Mark's writing was brilliant. It was a great book that nobody ever saw.
Mm. It sounds like this was a very busy time for you because I'm looking at kind of the your bibliography. You mentioned the Ray, which you were
Hmm.
developing. You have the Impact stuff, which unfortunately I guess fizzled out. But you also have you're a founding member, or are you developing? I don't know where the sequence is of Milestone, right? Which seems to be obviously fantastical, but more, I think, less fantastical than the Impact line, more grounded to your sensibilities. How exactly did that? I guess how did you keep everything balanced, and how did Milestone? Um, what role did you play, and was it a studio? I mean, were people working sort of side by side in the way you hear like cross-gen, or was it just kind of an imprint? What was the initial conception?
Okay, so we're talking about pre-production. Okay, so
Hmm.
in terms of how they actually produced the comics, by that time I was gone. All
Okay.
right, so I was involved in creating these characters and creating this universe, and Dwayne McDuffie and myself, we created virtually all the characters, and I pretty much created, I want to say 90% of the world, of the backstory, of the Dakota universe. I named it Dakota, and kind of, I invented the topography and the 10th Avenue Bridge and the history of the thing and where it came from and the James River and this, the drunken sailor gets lost and blah blah blah, and we all contributed uh, uh, primarily uh, to certain characters like Dennis Cowan came in with the concept that became Blood Syndicate. I came in with Icon and Rocket. Dwayne McDuffie came through the door with the concept for Hardware. And then at our initial meeting, we were breaking up, and I said, "Well, something's missing here. We're really missing like an archetype, like a Spider-Man type character." And Dwayne goes, "Oh, I got something for that," and he just like spits out, just vomits the character that would become known as Static. So Static was pretty much completely Dwayne, without any you know, I think all I did was name it. I said I got the name. We'll call him Static because James Brown had a record out, a hit record at that time called Static. Don't start none. Won't be none. And I was like, let's call him Static. So I named a lot of those characters. I want to say I named most of the original characters. Um, Icon was named something else, so they named Icon. They changed the name from Paragon or whatever it was to Icon because there was some issue with trademark. Um, and so this was going on contemporary at the same time, I think, that I was working on Impact and so forth. Because Mike, no, Mike had not left yet. Mike was still there because Mike and Paul Levitz were trying to convince me not to leave DC. They wanted me to stay at DC. So Paul Levitz put together an offer where if I decided to not go with the Milestone guys, to not leave staff, that he would he put together this offer for me to develop a creator-owned book, and I ended up creating a book called Zero with an X, uh, and that was kind of in lieu of me leaving with Milestone. So instead of me going with Milestone, I stayed on staff at DC, and I became the DC Comics staff liaison to what became the Milestone group. Um, but yeah, I created a lot of that stuff, or co-created with Dwayne, and then of course Dennis, is solely responsible for all the character designs. I created the logo, that stylish M, and I kind of did that like on a whim because the group had we were called something else. We were called something really lame. I think I had called us Creative Partners Limited or something like that. And Paul Levitt said, "Well, you need a better name than that." And the group decided to call themselves Milestone. I said, "Oh, well, you're going to need a logo for that." So, I was literally spending nights in Jim Chadwick's office at DC Comics. Jim Chadwick was at the time the art director. He just left DC staff, I think, last year or the year before.
Yeah.
And I was spending the night in his office because he had all the design programs on his computer. Remember, these are early days of personal computers, so there wasn't a computer on everybody's desk, So I had to wait until Jim went home, and he graciously allowed me to go in and just kind of live there. So I'd be in Jim Chadwick's office, working on building out the world and then creating the pitch document, the presentation booklet, whatever. And then I'd be on the phone with Dwayne McDuffie with Derek Dingle. Derek Dingle, it's like, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning. I'm at DC. Derek is at Black Enterprise, and Derek is feeding me numbers because we have to also do the P&Ls and the numbers and stuff, So, and all those spreadsheets have to be in the booklet, in the packet that we're giving to Paul. So there was a lot. There were 18-hour marathon meetings at Dennis's house, which I'm sure, his girlfriend at the time really appreciated. Um, None of us are with the women that we were with when we started this process. It took a real toll, a personal toll on all of us. It was a great deal of work and a great deal of investment, but it was also like a great opportunity, and Paul really made that happen, made that opportunity happen. But he also made us, I don't want to say earn it, but it wasn't a gift. We had to go and get it. And it was a lot of work. But glad we did it.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like a lot of work, but it sounds like it was something fulfilling. Even though, or maybe especially because even though you didn't do all of the you didn't continue on with Milestone in the same capacity, but you got zero out of it, which I think is a great book, and you were able to sort of get this. Was it a mini? I guess a maxi series. What was 12 issues? Um,
Yeah, it ended up being 12 issues. I don't know that uh, it was intended to be a miniseries, but Zero had a tough way to go because again, it's like I think in a lot of ways, I don't know if it's still this way, but certainly in those days, comic books, the companies were run by people who just never grew up. And there was a lot of pettiness going on in the office, and there was a lot of resentment going on in the office. So Zero was not treated well by the company. It was among the worst experiences editorially that I've had in my career. And I think that there was some jealousy on the part of if not editorial, but I think editorial certainly. I got a whiff of that from editorial, but there was some jealousy toward Milestone because, you know, why are we giving Milestone all this energy and giving Milestone all this money? And so there was, some of that, and Milestone was created not to publish black superheroes. We were trying to create we were trying to create channels of distribution, independent channels of distribution into black communities, into the black market. That's what it was created for. And Either nobody told DC's marketing department or they just didn't want to cooperate. So what they did was they took this product that really has a target audience over there, that has this target audience in the black community, and they just dumped it into Diamond, into the mainstream, distribution channels, and they go into the flow of the mom and pop shops. Well, the mom and pop shops around the country, this is DC and Marvels. This is our bread and butter, is the retailers, and we love our retailers. Don't get me wrong, but at the same time, it's like, you know, you have to target your product, whatever your product is. If Double XL magazine, you're not going to find Double XL magazine or the Source magazine, let's say Scarsdale, Long Island. Well, maybe you will find it in Scarsdale. I don't know. Scarsdale may have changed, but you get what I'm saying is that you have to understand, like, where you're putting this product, and I never got the sense that DC's marketing was as enthused about Milestone as Paul Levitz personally was, because Paul was very committed to it. DC editorial just didn't understand what DC was doing with Milestone in the first place. Now, what's that got to do with Zero? Um, Zero was always seen and always treated by DC as a black book, which was incredibly unfair. And so as a result, it was really mistreated. They put no energy into marketing Zero, and they just wanted it to go away. And if you don't put a bunch of energy behind a book, if you're not excited about it, if the company is not excited about it, the retailers, they sniff that out, they pick that up, and again, I think Zero having as many black characters in it. Um, they weren't all black characters. He was a guy that lived in two worlds. He was a basketball player in his secret. His Clark Kent was a he was a basketball player. So the basketball team, well, they're basketball players. A lot of black guys on the basketball team. Okay, and Zero was black. But when he went into action, he put on this mask, and he was a white guy. And it
Right.
was this dichotomy, and but it was treated as a quote unquote black book, and just sort of sent out to die. So and some of the issues were not even proofread. So there were at least one issue that I can think of where the wrong balloons were pasted up on the wrong pages. Like the balloons for page 3 were pasted up on page 2. Okay, now how that happened, I can't imagine because the pointers are all going to the wrong place and it makes no sense. And nobody caught it and it ended up in print. And that's just one of many, many, many goof ups that were done with that book. And then like the leading antagonist was a Japanese character named One, because Zero was a book about a reverse hierarchy. So the lower your number, the more deadly an assassin you were. So Zero obviously is the top dog, and his
Yeah.
main antagonist was One, One, and One was a Japanese guy whom they painted bright yellow in a very offensive way. And As the creator of the book, with my name on it, so you look in the indicia of Zero, it says copyright Christopher Priest. By contract, I had contractually should have been able to put my foot down and say you have to fix these things, and the editors just ignored me and never fixed anything, and they just screwed the book over. So that was a really, bitter taste in my mouth. Now, hopefully, we have been talking with Image about repackaging Zero. I had hoped to get to it last year, but I've been waiting on. We're involved with a film deal that is in the middle of as these things go that just kind of drag on,
Yeah.
but we had made an agreement with G Unit, which is 50 cents a film unit that does wonderful stuff on television, and they were planning to do this as their first feature. So I was waiting to get all of that lined up before we moved forward with a collection of the Zero thing. But that I assume that will happen within the next year or so.
I can't wait to see that. While you were speaking, I was wondering if, and maybe this pervades even to today, is sort of at the big companies, particularly, that there's just an anti-new bias. It's just so much. Everybody can wrap their heads around a fifth Batman title or a third, Spider-Man title, and anything new is just, I don't want to say doomed, but it seems like there's just not going to be the energy there to promote and push the book. And I feel like so much good work gets caught up in that sort of paradigm. And
Yeah.
nowadays I think there's much more other avenues for getting that work out. Like with the Kickstarters of the world and the smaller publishers. So you have more creative control, but like it just seems like I don't know. I don't know where I'm going with this, but it just seems like you cannot, it's so much more of an uphill battle trying to get anything different, new than what has happened before, or the characters that have been established to get a foothold in at least the bigger companies.
Yeah, we're developing. I'm developing a book with Skybound. I assume that this will be either late 25 or it'll be early 26, maybe first quarter 26. Um, and I'm really sweating it, because it can take anywhere from 4 to 6 issues for a writer and an artist to sort of get their book dialed in.
Mhm.
So like if you go back and watch the pilot episode of your favorite TV show, what you'll notice is that the characters, they don't quite, the actors don't quite have the characters down, and the writing is a little awkward, and all the beats feel a little off. The lighting is different because they haven't quite gotten it dialed in.
Right.
It takes a while to really, get the motor humming. Uh, we don't have that kind of time anymore because attention spans are very short. And because comic books are very expensive, made all the more so because shipping costs are through the roof. And now we're talking about tariffs because a lot of the stuff is printed in Canada. Most of the stuff's printed in Canada. So there's a bunch of moving parts here. And again, uh, our frontline retailers, these are not rich people. These are people with, low margins on these products, high rents, liability insurance, a lot of overhead. So every month, our retailers, they sit down with this catalog, with Marvel's catalog or with Diamond or whatever they're looking at there. And it's like the racing form, and they're trying to figure out what to bet on.
Mm.
So it's become common practice to slash orders on number two immediately, and then slash them again on issue three. So it's kind of Sting said something in his documentary, "Bring on the Night." Great documentary if you ever get a chance to watch this. It's a documentary about Sting doing his first concert with this all black jazz band, and it was awesome. And he's explaining that with jazz, you can kind of take your time because the audience is kind of acclimated to like, okay, this is going to be whether it's jazz or classical, it's going to be a long form piece, and they
Hmm.
kind of settle in, and it's like reading a novel, and they're
Right.
settling in to appreciate the piece. Okay, with rock and roll, and I'm quoting Sting now. He said, with rock and roll, you have to burn from the very first cut. So like right away you have to snag them. So I'm writing the first, I think I've written the first six issues of the Skybound thing, and I'm doing four or five different drafts of it, and we're moving things around, and we're having conversations, and we're trying this and we're trying that. And it may be a bit futile because all we can do is take our best guess, but the fact is the business is very hard on new. Whatever is new, they're going to be very hard on it. And yeah, the, the thing that DC can most reliably sell is Batman. I'm not sure what that is at Marvel. What is hot at Marvel? What is their most reliable book these days?
I mean, I would have said X-Men like 20 years ago, but
Yeah,
uh,
I don't think that's it anymore.
I
No.
don't think that's it anymore either. I don't know. I guess it would be something in the, Avengers realm in some way.
Yeah.
Because I think it tracks with, the movies in a large
Well,
part
yeah, but
now.
it really bugs me also that there hasn't been enough synergy with the movies, and I don't know, because I'm not at the office, it's easy for me to sit here and pontificate and fart all over the place. Well, what they should have did was,
Sure.
but uh, I would think that I would have wanted to have some sort of product out there that would be a magnet product. And what I mean by that is, for all these people who walked out of the Avengers movie, and walked into a comic shop, let there be something right at the door or as close to the door as it possibly could be that is like, an Avengers primer, like that has, a photo cover of the actors in the costumes on the cover that says, hey, 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 read this, look here, and a story inside that says, once upon a time, there was this group called the Avengers, and it can kind of walk the newbie, because a new person walking into I'm not a new, I've been writing comic books for 45 years. I walk into a comic shop and I'm dazed and confused. I could not tell you who Spider-Man is these days, and or where to start. If I looked at the wall of new books, which one would I pick up? holy mackerel, it would
Yeah.
be, a real challenge. But several 100,000 people, or several million people, or however many people went to see these movies. Okay, if we could get 10% of them to read comics, our sales would go up tenfold.
Yeah.
So a greater effort should have been made, I think, to go get these folks because there's clearly an appetite, or there was at least clearly an appetite for the Marvel characters. Now, how do we capitalize on it? And I would have made that my priority, just personally.
Yeah. I totally agree with that, and I think I've heard it from a number of people as well. It's just how did you miss such a big opportunity? I mean, it was just kind of a fumble from the very beginning. Just letting,
I don't know that I agree. I'm sorry to cut you off. I don't know that I
yeah,
agree with that. I think that there are limitations. There are firewalls between the studio and the comics where the studio can sort of reach down into the comics and smack us around, because
yeah,
Marvel has to submit their scripts to standards and practices, and they come back with their notes from the lawyers and from whoever. I don't know that that works the other way. I don't know that the comic book, that the publishing side, I don't know that CB Cebulski gets to, call up Kevin Feige and say, look at here. I don't, I don't know that it works that way. I know CB. I know CB would love Tom Brevoort, Nick Lowe. Those guys would love to have better synergy with the movies. So I'm not that quick to go, well, Marvel blew it. I don't really know what the story is or why it isn't happening, just that it isn't happening.
yeah. Yeah, I guess that's sort of an all too easy judgment to make in the comfort of my home. But it just seems like there are so many ideas, there's so many possibilities that were not tried. But then I think maybe the paradigm had already shifted by then. In other
Yeah,
words, that the comics were only seen, they were not seen as quote unquote products anymore, ends in themselves. They were
right,
now seen as R&D
right,
for other media. And
right.
so if that thinking had changed by that point already, then it would have been hard to say, well, let's see if we can increase the interest in this other product. It's not even a product anymore. If it is just a sort of a different way to tell stories that can then be, I guess, monetized or however you want to put it, in different media.
Well, it's also kind of unfair, I think, that I'm sure it's a necessity for bookkeeping purposes, for tax purposes, for royalty purposes, that they keep a separate set of books from the studio. Is all that money is separate from the publishing, but it makes absolutely no sense to me that the studio can be producing this outrageous level of revenue, and yet my guys at Marvel, Brevoort and Cebulski and Nick Lowe and those guys, that they are every day under an enormous amount of pressure to turn a profit from publishing. That makes no sense to me whatsoever. If you're going to treat them like an R&D arm, then treat them like an R&D arm and fully fund them, and let them share in the spoils of the merchandising, and not just the movies, but with the ancillary, stuff that's going on, and don't do the funny accounting. Take some of the pressure off of those guys and those ladies. I'm sorry, I'm being sexist now, but of those people. Take
Yeah,
some of the pressure off of those people because they do really good work. They're doing their level best, and they're generating the ideas that you guys are capitalizing off of,
yeah,
and yet they've all got, like, guns pointed to their heads because of the realities of how they play these games with the numbers.
right. Well, you have such a long and high quality bibliography. We're not going to get to it all. Even though I would love to, I don't want to take up too much of your time. I do want to get to Vampirella. which I know is part of your current workload, and I'd love to hear more about it. But before we do, I have to ask you about Black Panther because I worked at Marvel for a couple years, 2000 to 2002. So right in this sort of Marvel Knights um, era. And so I'd love to know how, because Black Panther was at least initially part of Marvel Knights, how you hooked up with the Marvel Knights guys and how that whole project came about.
I got a call from Joe Quesada and Jimmy Palmiotti. And I thought that they were going to offer me Daredevil. I was very excited. I've always wanted to write Daredevil. I
Yeah,
still want to write Daredevil. Marvel, call me, you
take
know.
note.
So I thought they were going to offer me Daredevil, and I was very excited about that,
Yeah,
and I'm on the phone, I'm chatting it up with the guys, and they're, yada yada yada. And then they said something Black Panther. I went, who? Black Panther? He said Black Panther. And I was like, and my heart just sank, and I was like, Black Panther, you mean that guy that's hanging around in the back row
in the
of the
back of the
Avengers
event.
class picture? I mean, by that time, Black Panther, I think what happened was, when Stan and Jack created Black Panther, and Jack never gets nearly enough credit for these types of things. I think a lot of this is Jack. You know, um, when they created Black Panther, if you go back and look at those Fantastic Four issues, Black Panther was this wealthy monarch, this man of mystery. Uh, he was a guy who created most of that advanced technology. He was a sovereign, he was a leader of a sovereign nation, rich, powerful, and he single-handedly defeated Marvel's top superhero family. Okay, now over the years, as the character got passed on to other writers, I felt like other writers started to confuse Black Panther with Tarzan, and they started treating him like Tarzan. I mean, it's like they just went, well, he's got no powers, and he's just this guy in a leotard, and they really didn't know what to do with him. Then they made him a school teacher, and there was all kind of like really ridiculous turns that were going on with him, and he was just like this second banana character, and then I started seeing stuff like where, he was getting beat up and dragged behind pickup trucks. And, there was one episode where some kid comes up behind him with a rock. Some kid sneaks up on Black Panther and hits him with a rock and knocks him out. So Quesada says Black Panther. I'm like, I'm not doing that. I turned him down. So then he sicked Mark Wade on me, and I got the call from Mark Wade and Brian Augustin. They tag team me on a conference call, and they're like, "No, you got to do this. You got to do this," and blah blah blah. If you've seen the movie Casino with Robert De Niro, there's a scene in the movie where the mob boss comes to try to talk Robert De Niro into taking over the casino. So Robert De Niro is like on this chaise lounge by the pool, and he says, "Look, and he tries to talk the mob boss out of it. What do I know about running a casino? So he's turning them down. So finally, they twist his arm, and De Niro says, "Okay, look, if I do it, I got to do it my way. I mean it. No interference. I got to do it my way." And that's kind of the speech that I gave Joe and Jimmy and said, "Look, if I do this, uh, no more of that crap. If I do this, he's going to be a badass. It's going to be this. It's going to be that. And oh, by the way, it's going to be funny." And the funny thing kind of threw them. They were like, "Huh?" And I went, "Trust me." I don't think Black Panther himself is necessarily funny, but I thought that if that if we're going to do Black Panther, then we desperately need to lighten up and inject it with some humor, which we ended up doing. And I think if I had a criticism to level against Black Panther, contemporary Black Panther, and with all due respect to my fellow writers, lighten up, because everybody who takes over Black Panther now wants to make the statement, and everything is so serious, because we're making the statement. I wasn't making any statements. I was writing Batman. I was making Marvel's Batman, and we had this character named Achebe who was, the Joker to Black Panther's Batman, and we were just having fun. And we were, we shot Thor in the head, and we did a bunch of crazy, and we did a bunch of crazy stuff with the book. And and I'm I had a good time writing it. After it got moved back into the Marvel universe, I came under enormous pressure to get sales up. And now this goes back to what you were saying earlier, Mike, about how hard it is to do new. Um, I think at some point you have to stop chasing numbers. You have to have a little humility, a little acceptance of like, okay, this is what this book is, and these are the people who graciously show up every month to read it and to support us. Because what we did for several years is take those people for granted while we kept reaching for more
Mm.
people. So we kept having all these guest stars and we kept trying these stunts and these crossovers, which was a real distraction and did a real disservice to the character and to our readers, And then Marvel forced me to get rid of Shala altogether, and we brought in Casper Cole, and we did a whole new take on Black Panther, which is interesting in and of itself, but it wasn't Black Panther you
Mm.
know. So I think at some point, and I have learned that lesson now. I don't chase numbers anymore. I'm just going, well, this is what the book is. Do we want to keep going, or do we want to try something else? But yeah, it was a great experience.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I feel like, yeah, chasing numbers is going to ultimately disappoint the creators who want to do like you, who want to do what they want to do and fulfill their creative urges, and the readers who I think you talked about sophistication earlier.
Yeah,
They can see through it.
yeah. Oh, yeah,
They
they
can
can.
see.
Oh, readers can feel it if you
Yeah,
guys are just like pandering.
right.
They,
Exactly.
they know when you're like, okay, why is Ghost Rider showing up all of a sudden?
Right.
They're not stupid. They know what you're doing.
Yeah. There was only one reason back in, I don't know if it was 92, 93, whatever, that Ghost Rider showed up, and that was to goose sales.
Those sales. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So,
He was all over the place.
yeah,
All right. So, as I said, can't get to everything. Would love to have you back, but let's talk about Vampirella.
sure.
Um, that's one of your most recent projects. On the face of it, seems like off the beaten path for something you'd be interested in writing. Tell me a little bit about, what the interest is in the character, and were you trying to take that, Christopher Priest approach towards grounding what on the face of it is a very, fantastical character, a colorful character, and bring some, I guess, more humanity to it, to her.
I think that's a very apt way to put it. I need to write that down. I think no, really, I think that's a great way of putting it. Uh, Vampirella and I meant to send you like we actually have a PDF that's I put together that is a sample packet. Here's some pages out of Vampirella that kind of tells uh, people who have never read the book before what this book is about and introduces the characters and how it all works. So I'll email that to you when I get done, and maybe you can post it somewhere. Should be posted somewhere. Dynamite has said yes, post it wherever you want to post it.
Right.
At any rate, for those of you who don't know, Vampirella is a book about a young woman trying to make it on her own in the big city. She just happens to be a vampire from outer space. Um, so, if you think about the cartoon Casper the Friendly Ghost, you're probably too young to remember Casper the Friendly
Oh,
Ghost,
I
but
know Casper.
oh, okay.
I mean,
But
I'm not steeped in the the
yeah,
entire
yeah.
series, but yeah,
But basically, Casper wants what we all want. He wants community, purpose. He wants love, friendship. He just wants what we all want, And if in the cartoon, the way the gag works is that he meets new people and they like him and he likes them and they're having a great time, blah blah. But at some point during the cartoon, the people start to realize that Casper is a dead baby And dead babies are really scary. And they go, it's a ghost, and they run away. And he cries, and it's very sad,
Mm.
and it's very heartbreaking, So Vampirella, it's like, she's really not that much different from anybody else, except she happens to be a vampire from outer space, and that kind of freaks people out. And of course she becomes a magnet for demons and witches, and she has a crazy unhinged mother that is always meddling and causing problems for her. The problem is that with Vampirella, I have a problem, the same problem with Vampirella that I had with Deathstroke, which we won't have time to talk about, of course. But Deathstroke, people would look at the covers for Deathstroke and they'd see him standing there snarling, holding his bloody sword,
Right.
because that's every Deathstroke cover ever, right?
Yeah.
And they would go, "Well, Deathstroke is a book about a guy with a bloody sword. It's about like this bloodthirsty killer." And I went, "No, Deathstroke, my Deathstroke anyway, was not a book about the world's deadliest assassin. It was a book about the world's worst dad. It was about a guy who loved and wanted to be loved, but was capable of neither. So he would do crazy, stupid things like put a hit out on his own daughter so that he could, spend time with her, protecting her from this imaginary assassin. This is the kind of stuff that Deathstroke would do. So people who never read the book, there's a lot of times, Mike, where people don't read particular books because they think they assume they know what the book is about, but they've never read it, but they assume they know what the book is about because they see the cover. So you see the cover for Vampirella, and you think the book is about skulls and witches and sexuality. Now there is some sexuality in the book, but that's not like that's not the headline. That's not the sexuality in Vampirella is on par with if I was writing if I was writing a book about Barbara Gordon and she had a boyfriend or a girlfriend or a
Mm.
giraffe or whatever turns you on. So it's no different from anything like that. Um, I did scale back how we approached the Vampirella, because when I took over Vampirella, the adventures were just way too big, and she's fighting hordes of demons, and she's going into hell, little literal hell, and she's talking to the devil, the devil, the devil. And I'm like, no, no. So I send her speed dating, and I have her, just getting involved in, more, you know the things that regular women get involved in. So we're doing like a it's not a reboot, it's a new volume. I was brought in to work on volume 5. In March, we are launching volume 6. So there will be a new number 1. And we are dealing with Vampirella now as a single mom.
Yeah.
And she's a single mom who is suffering from postpartum depression. And postpartum depression, left untreated, can really derail somebody's life and their mental health, their emotional health. Um, so she has rescued her baby. Her baby had been kidnapped right after childbirth. So she never had a chance to bond with the baby. So she has gotten the baby back, but because she never bonded with the baby, uh, the postpartum is that much worse because she doesn't have any feeling for this crying child. I mean, and then she feels incredible guilt because she's supposed to love. It's her baby. She's supposed to love this baby, but the baby is a stranger, and
Right.
and and the baby is driving her completely insane. And we're seeing the emotional impact, the atom bomb, the nuclear fallout that bring a newborn child into your life. Bring people watch too much TV and they see on TV, oh, it's a blessed event and everybody's happy and blah 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 blah. No, babies are like a flaming fireball of hell that just drops into your lap. And it's one of the main reasons why couples break up, because they're not ready for the impact that this blessed event is going to have on you. So she's like really a mess. And at the height of her dismay, where she's becoming almost catatonic, and starts thinking about self-harm or even harming the baby, right at the height of this thing, a mysterious stranger shows up. and the baby stops crying, and she's like, why is the baby not crying? He's always crying. So she goes in the room to see what's going on, and she sees this dark, mysterious stranger in there holding her infant and comforting the baby, and he looks at her and he's kind of annoyed with her, and he goes, well, I thought somebody should hold him, and we will see, well, the readers see before Vampirella does, that this dark stranger is actually the baby. Uh, it is her son who has traveled back from the future, from 50 years in the future, um, because with her postpartum left untreated, Vampirella becomes psychotic, and she uh, changes from being like basically a good guy into being like a menace, and it escalates to the point where she literally uh, decides to take over the world, and she becomes like this witch of Ashthorn, this powerful, imagine the Emperor from Star Wars, and now she's this like cyberpunk, maniacal, evil person, and who has conquered the world. And her son has traveled back in time to try to convince Vampirella, who has rescued the baby. She rescued the baby from her evil sister. It's a long story, but she rescued the baby. Her sister had stolen the baby, and she had just gotten the baby back from her sister. So her son has traveled back in time to try to convince Vampirella to give the baby back, because Vampirella is a terrible mother, and it's a terrible mistake her trying to raise this kid. And if she keeps this kid, if her postpartum is not treated, not dealt with, that eventually the world is going to suffer as a result of it. So it becomes this fun bit of business where as, as we move forward, the narrative is split between our present day, where the son, whose name is Cicero, is trying to convince Vampirella, and then the other half of the book is set in 50 years in the future, where it's Vampirella's 100th anniversary. It's the 100th anniversary of Vampirella's arrival on Earth, and we see this witch of Ashthorn who has, caused all these problems, and the chaos that erupts as a result of that. So it's a real fun bit of business, a real fun plot storyline that we're kicking off next month, and that's kind of it in a nutshell. It's you know don't be afraid. Vampirella, a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun, and much like Black Panther, you wouldn't expect it to have humor, and humor is a big part of the Vampirella book. Vampirella herself is not necessarily very funny, but there's a lot of humor in the book, and then my partner who draws this book is a wonderful man named Ergun Gunduz, and Ergun, he's Turkish, doesn't speak a word of English, but he gets the nuances down to the tiny details of what I'm up to, and then he adds his own little bits of business in there that just it's just wonderful. And he has this great style, and everything looks kind of like animation cells, and he does this wonderful color work that is just outrageous. So he's just really knocking things out of the park. It's a great book. I'm not just trying to, obviously I want to sell comic books, but I really mean this. If I didn't think it was a great book, I'd say something else. I'd find some other way to BS you. But it's a really great book, and I'm very happy with it, and very proud of this book.
I mean, sounds like an absolute blast and just fascinating at the same time. I love all the concepts that are at play with the sort of the timeline switches and the grounding, the postpartum depression and all that kind of stuff. It sounds great. So excited to see that
I
in
would I would have I
showing
would
up
have
in March.
I would have liked to see Sue Richards go through that with Franklin. I think they missed an opportunity there, because now you have a kid with superpowers and so forth, and uh, I don't have children. My sister has a kid, and she had a kid when I was 13 years old, so she brings this kid home, and I hate to say it, but a lot of times she would like sneak out of the house while I was asleep, and I'd wake up and it was just me and the kid. And she knew I wasn't going to just leave the baby there. So now I'm
Right.
Mr. Mom with this kid. So Denny taught me to write what you know. And I think some other interviewer asked me, well, what makes you think, or what makes you qualified to write about this? Okay, now I didn't suffer postpartum depression, but I had a newborn that I had to deal with, and a
Hmm.
lot of what I'm writing in terms of the stressors that she's dealing with, um, I know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And anybody who's had a kid, who has had a child, you know, I think they could go, yeah, that's kind of right. So at least I hope so. Anyway, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
Mike. I didn't mean to cut you off. You were wrapping up there.
No, not at all. I think you certainly, it seems like you have the experience to write about such things. And, honestly, I feel like we've gotten so far away from like what you should be able to write situations that you haven't personally been in. Whether that's from drawing from people's experiences that are close to you, or even in some ways reading about it. I mean, it shouldn't be that you can only write about, characters or situations that you are or have been in. So I'm glad that, you know
Yeah,
I don't
I
know. I'm glad
agree.
that you can continue to write things that are, from a diversity of perspectives, and that not all, you can write a
Yeah.
female character. You know what I mean? You can
Well,
write a
yeah.
vampire from space. You're not a vampire from space.
Well,
So
gosh, I hope not. And that's for a while there, uh, uh, editors were casting writers. They weren't really hiring writers.
right.
They were like, okay, so if we're doing a story about a Korean lesbian kung fu master, then in order to write it, you had to be a Korean lesbian kung fu master, which is ridiculous. I think writers are a lot like actors. I think
Yeah.
the main prerequisite, I think an actor can perform any part if they do enough homework and they try hard enough. They can perform any part. Uh, excuse me. You know, I think that with writers, it's a matter of being the master of your particular universe. So you really need to be able to write authoritatively, whether it's from your experience or from your research or other. But I don't think there's any reason why we have to confine women to writing female characters or black people to write only black characters or whatever that story was. And for a long time I was kind of I was typecast, and I was only offered black characters. So there was like almost a decade where I just didn't work at all because I just kept turning work down. Because after Black Panther, people would only offer me black characters, which was ironic because the Black Panther series was not actually about the black guy. That series was about the white guy. It was a story about this guy, Everett Ross, and about his cultural awakening and the culture shock that he went through from running behind this guy, this king of Wakanda. So, the Black Panther book, when I was writing it, wasn't actually about the Black Panther. And yet I became typecast as a guy who was only exclusively offered black characters until Deathstroke. So I'm grateful that I can get to do these things, um, and I hope that that comics fans and Vampirella fans, you know, uh, aren't up in arms because of the pattern of my chromosomes or whatever the thing is. Um, I know this character. I've been writing her for quite a while now. I love her to death. I love women to death. I hope that we're doing good work. And when I'm not sure, I ask somebody. I do some homework. I do some research.
Yeah.
So hopefully we're getting it right.
Yeah. Well, I for one am very excited to read all about it, and can't wait for it to come out. So we will look for that in March. Anything else you want to give us a heads up on in terms of close future work? Yeah, recent
Yeah,
future doesn't really immediate future. I don't know. Whatever you want to
yeah.
say. Things that are coming up in the next few months that you want to make us aware of.
Well, there's a Kickstarter that I did with Tyler Mane. Tyler Mane is an actor who played Sabretooth in the Deadpool Wolverine movie, and it's called The Last Spartan. It's a graphic novel that's that's available now, but I don't know that they have their ordering set up yet. But it was launched as a Kickstarter, so it's out there somewhere. The Last Spartan, that's me. Um, there's a book I'm doing for Marvel that I believe, will start shipping this summer. We just sent the catalog out last week, so I can't announce it yet because, far as I know, they haven't announced it yet. But I know we just did the catalog, so I guess any day now you'll hear about that. So that'll start in the summer. Um, uh, there's a graphic novel. It was supposed to be a mini series, but it's taken so long to get drawn that they're going to release it all at once. So the graphic novel is coming out from Humanoids. It's called Babylon. It's very funny. It's a very good book that I'll tell you more about when they're ready to start pushing that. What else am I missing here? There's the Skybound thing, the Marvel thing, the Humanoids thing, the Kickstarter, and I feel like I'm forgetting something else because I'm always doing something. But yeah, there's a bunch of stuff coming
Sounds
out
like
there.
enough.
Yeah, yeah, there's a bunch of stuff coming.
Okay, we're back. Boy, Priest has so much going on. And he also has a lot of great opinions and thoughts about the industry and about, his previous work and what's going on now. So, um, even though this was a long one, I still feel like we barely scratched the surface. So hopefully, he will be amenable to coming back on down the line. But yeah, look for that new Vampirella series coming out. It's very interesting the way he has described it and bringing in, a son of Vampirella into the mix and how that all plays out. And of course, the Marvel Knights, the world to come. I'm like, expectations are sky high for that. So, Priest, thanks for coming on. Everybody out there, thank you for listening. Thank you for viewing. Thank you for rating, reviewing, subscribing, getting the word out about Dollar Bin Bandits. We got a lot of great interviews lined up for you. So keep tuning in, and we'll see you next issue.